is advised.
Hello and welcome to the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV, Truth Frequency Radio, wherever fine talk shows are minted and sold. Gonna check the mic, testing, sibilance. This is the Liam Scheff Show on the radio and the internet. We're going to talk about a couple things. We've got 2 hours. In the second hour, we're going to revisit a show that got me momentarily banished from YouTube until I wrote them a series of very reasonable letters, well-reasoned letters, that apparently were ignored, as they never wrote me back, but they did change their tune a little. Yes, I had done a show years ago where I talked about the history of the nuclear snower industry and the nuclear power industry, which is going to destroy the world. It's going to destroy the world. There's not much you could do about it. You could protest it. They're building more and more of these things in Asia. We're all going to die young of some terrible thing. And it got flagged on YouTube for inciting potentially unlawful, illegal behavior, which is clever, which is amusing, should be amusing. So it was flagged for promoting potentially illegal behavior. Now it was a rather academic, it's me, is to joking around, slightly jokey history of the nuclear industry, talking about Robert Oppenheimer. It was flagged, taken down, and then my account was listed as being in bad status because I had violated community standards about something. And I wrote and I said, this is, an academic show I did on Robert Oppenheimer, or Julius Robert Oppenheimer, excuse me. So why in the world, please show me the exact portion of the thing that got me violated and banned. It didn't come up. I said, can I appeal? Nobody answers, So there's this standard appealing box, and you have about 150 characters, not words, but characters. You have a sentence, essentially, to say, excuse me, I'm not really sure what happened or why it was done. And they wrote back and said, sorry, rejected. So I found they have a thing that says press@youtube.com, and I wrote them a letter. I said, hello, I'm an independent journalist. I was doing a radio broadcast, essentially, on the internet, I understand, but certainly this thing's been up for 2.5 years plus, and I certainly didn't violate anything for 2.5 years. And then it's the anniversary of Fukushima, and it was flagged, and now it's gone, and I've got a strike against my account. After that, I posted that and a short video on Facebook, and that got around, and I guess some people wrote in, and the thing was put back. It was just put back. Let me see if it's still there. Let me see if it's still there. So I'll be seeing if it's still there right now, as we speak. Will I dream, Dave? Will I dream, Dave? Daisy, Daisy, give me... Well, it was put back with nothing really explained to me at all. Except there was still a strike against my account. Now, why would there still be a strike against my account if the thing had been put back? Apparently, there was nothing really wrong with it anyway. Well, it doesn't really matter because they had my number. It was the anniversary of Fukushima, which is going to destroy everybody. That and all the other things going on around the world. So let's see if it's still there. 2 years and change. The Energy Show, it's my old show. From 8/18, which is 2.5 years ago. Nuclear energy and its discontents. It's racked up another 30 views or so since then. It's a 2-hour show. The second hour is about Robert Oppenheimer. So anyway, they put it back up, but they still violated my minimal rights as a person hogging internet space and using electricity to put bullshit or whatever. Hopefully it's something reasonable online. So there it is. Now you know. And I'm going to play the second half of that show in the second hour of this show, just as a fine hey and how do you do to YouTube, who, lost their sense of humor, I guess, in allowing people to talk about Fukushima. Now, I will say during that show, I think I made one mistake. I said there were 2,300 nuclear bombs tested. I think the number is actually 2049. That's admitted. Who knows how many more were tested? Sorry, it's a funny word. Of course, we use depleted uranium all over the Middle East, and there have been many other disasters that we've gone into. Anyway, the world's a total nuclear disaster, and that's all anybody can say about it, and nobody's going to do anything about it to fix it. Journalists get a lot wrong when they talk about science. There are a number of things journalists get wrong when they talk about science. I did a short video on that and it was making the rounds. And, you know, people are interested when you sort of deconstruct. I don't use the word bunk or debunk. I think that that's a childish word. I think only the scientific psychopaths, snots, and internet hounds use that word because it immediately slanders, you know, or libels, I suppose, your opponent. If you're debunking it, you're accusing them of having been bunk and you're taking the bunk out. Well, that's not really reasonable, but you can deconstruct. And you can reasonably, logically deconstruct something and try to understand what it is and how it works or could work or might have worked. We're going to do that a little bit on this show with some of the things that science gets wrong. The second half of the show is going to be taken up with nuclear power, nuclear energy. I'm writing my new book. The new book is called American Heretic, which will feature essays on nuclear power, on the idea that we create our own reality with our thinking, with our minds. No, I don't think that's true. We influence our worldview, our perspective, but the oil company makes reality, and we just inhabit it like gerbils in a big plastic cage. And if you're a flat earther, you think the cage is flat and that's all there is, and there's a small little stuffed animal sun and a stuffed animal moon just floating above it because the God creator person put it there for us to view. And if you haven't gone entirely crazy, you understand that things are round and spin and spherical, and that the universe is eternal, and that we'll never know most of the answers to everything because underneath everything is mystery. Let's do a news catch-up, news roundup. Before we start, we're going to start with nuclear. We're going to end with nuclear. Let's jump into ENE News. It's the only site really worth reading on the internet. Start at the news from a few days ago. Shocking number of cancers around leaking nuclear power plant near New York City. That is Indian Point, about 25 miles away from the city, not the city center, but the city, the extended city, and about 40 miles away from Manhattan. Yes. What do they have in the water there? Cesium, tritium, something that you don't want to be drinking. And we thought New York City had problems as it was. No, now they've got a leaking nuclear power plant. Well, not just them, but Miami has Turkey Point off of its southern coast, and southern border, I should say. And Turkey Point is also leaking, I think, tritium into the Biscayne Bay. Biscayne Bay, where the Cuban gentlemen sleep all day. I was searching for the song you used to sing to me. New government report, Fukushima found in U.S. marine life. That's from a couple weeks ago. Alert, U.S. emergency at U.S. nuclear power plant after massive fire and multiple explosions. I think that was in Tennessee. Not exactly, I don't quite remember. And another fire breaks out at another U.S. plant that's also in the deep south. Yeah, we've got our hands full of nuclear problems. Washington Post, no one knows what to do with Fukushima. I think that was 3 weeks ago. Nuclear, let's see if I get a date on that. No. Nuclear expert, Fukushima like the worst nightmare becoming a reality. Shocking how many people died in Fukushima. Cremated bodies of Fukushima radiation workers found. I think they were burying them in some local monastery. Reuters, Fukushima fuel melted through containment vessels and is spewing radiation. Let's read this one all the way through. Reuters. Fukushima melted through containment vessels and is spewing radiation. Nuclear expert, fuel has scattered all over the place. Government, fuel may have burned into the environment. Well, of course it has. TEPCO official, fuel could have flowed out like lava in a volcano. Anything new here? No, not really if you've been paying attention, but now they're saying what we suspected, years ago. March 11th, 2016. Today, the radiation at the Fukushima plant is still so powerful it has proven impossible to get into its bowels to find and remove the extremely dangerous blobs of melted fuel rods weighing hundreds of tons. Hundreds of tons, hundreds of tons, anybody? Hundreds of tons, hundreds of thousands of pounds. The fuel rods melted through their containment vessels in the reactors, and no one knows exactly where they are now. Where's Waldo? TEPCO has been developing robots, to negotiate obstacles in damaged tunnels and piping to search for the melted fuel rods. But, of course, the robots have all died. From radiation exposure, well, just send in people. 5 years on, melted fuel rods still spew radiation, says Reuters. Deutsche Welle, I don't remember the name. Deutsche Welle, I think. March 11th. It's a German internet site newspaper or journal. The melted nuclear fuel and the destroyed pressure in the nuclear. The melted nuclear fuel and the destroyed pressure in the nuclear reactors. Nuclear vessel 1 to 3 reactors 1 to 3 continue to be major problems. Major problems. Sounds like a Jerry Lewis movie. So far, nobody knows exactly what happened in there or how to solve it. Ha 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 ha. Heinz Schmidl, a nuclear physicist, told DW. Until now, there are no solution to recover the melted fuel rods from the reactors. You mean not until now, but there remain no solutions. Up to this, including up to this point. It's a bad translation of until now. Aber jetzt would be there are still no solution to recover the melted fuel rods from the reactors. News Corp Australia. Today, the radiation at Fukushima plant is still so powerful, it's impossible to extract and move deadly melted fuel rods. TEPCO is grappling with the fact that they don't have the technology to find missing melted fuel rods in 3 reactors at the plant. The rods melted through containment vessels in the reactors. I don't know where that accent was from either. Guardian. This will be more spot on. It's the most daunting task the nuclear industry has ever faced. Removing hundreds of tons of melted fuel from the plant's stricken reactors. Something no nuclear operator has ever attempted. Of greatest concern, though, is Reactor 1, where the fuel may have burned through the pressure vessel, fallen to the bottom of the containment vessel into the concrete pedestal below, perhaps even outside it, according to a report by the International Research Institute for Nuclear Decommissioning. Masuda and TEPCO engineers who spoke to The Guardian conceded that they still don't know where the fuel is located. To be honest, we don't know exactly where the fuel is, Masuda said. No one has ever done what we're doing. Hey, you're not doing it. Good news. PBS NewsHour. Miles O'Brien, who, lost, had to have an arm amputated after going to Fukushima. Well, it's more than that. He was there doing a story, went to the Philippines, something fell on his arm, and then a bad bruise became something that had to be amputated. And it does make you wonder about the toxicity level. Anyway, what about the melted fuel in the reactor cores? They aren't even sure where it all is. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's the way he sounds. Miles O'Brien. I'm giving him Irish. Lake Barrett, TEPCO advisor. Is it in one big vertical lump on the floor underneath it? Oh, I love rhetorical questions. Or did it come down and flow like lava in a volcano and move out to the sides? We don't know yet. Nothing of this magnitude, i.e. the attempt to remove Fukushima's melted fuel, has ever been done by mankind. Great, call Captain Kirk. Get busy telling me how safe nuclear power is. Go ahead, line up. Tell me how safe it is. Nobody's ever done anything like this. Nobody has any idea what they're doing. We have no idea how to solve this problem. We're never going to solve this problem. Interview with nuclear engineer Hiroaki Koide. Translation by... Published March 8, 2016. We simply do not know where the core is or what state it's in. The government and TEPCO are convinced that the melted core fell through to the bottom of the pressure vessel and now lie at the bottom of the containment vessel, basically piling up like nuggets of the melted core. Let's go back to Lake Barrett's statement. Is it in a big vertical lump on the floor, or did it come down and flow like lava in a volcano and move out, in other words, burn through the thing to the sides? There's no way this would be the case. It should have been scattered all over the place, says engineer Hiroaki Koide. Though the containment vessel is made of steel, if the melted core has come in contact with that steel, just as it ate through the floor of the pressure vessel, it could possibly have melted through the containment vessel. There are situations, that's what a meltdown is, kids. There are situations in which the containment vessel can suffer a melt through. I think this likely has already happened. When? 2011. Really? You don't think so? This is the state of the science that we are in. Now, the mainstream has other things to report, like Kylie Jenner's something and, so-and-so's sex change operation. I suppose I could go to CNN for the headlines there, but I just don't feel like getting that depressed. Oh, what the hell, let's do it. This is CNN. Have they retired that James Earl Jones bit? I could never get enough of that. I mean, there's Darth Vader just talking about CNN. I mean, CNN breaking news. Let's just hold on. Let's just see. Come on. Let's just see if what? If on the front page of CNN, what? On the front page of CNN, there's anything about Fukushima, 3-core nuclear meltdown going on right now. Right now. Let's go ahead. Now, we got crime and justice, energy and environment. Let's click energy and environment, U.S. Sun Valley, California, Department of Water and Power, generating station. Under new climate plan, oh, it's greenhouse gas. Congressman sickening testimony in Flint hearing. Oh, yes, that's bad. Transcript of Republican debate in Miami. Very important. Death Valley comes alive with super bloom of wildflowers. Let me just look for nuclear. Inventor shows off Iron Man-like diving suit. Iron Man suit for the ocean. Smirconish. Trump shouted fire in a political theater. Bernie Sanders, GOP, Senator James Inhofe is a friend. Important news. Advice during Mississippi Delta flooding. Find higher ground. Really? Thanks, CNN. The wetsuit saves the environment while you surf. Huge glacier collapses in Argentina. Uh-oh, it must be CO2. Bald eagles in Maryland may have been killed by humans. Smartest bike in the world? Obama teases Trudeau over hockey. Ha 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 ha! Praises climate change agreement. I don't see anything about, well, why should it be in America? I mean, why should it be in America? We don't have anything to worry about by a totally polluted radioactive Pacific. Let's go to Asia. I mean, it definitely will be in Asia. Argentina sinks Chinese vessel. Coast Guard says fishing boat was fishing illegally. North Korea, 2 tests, nuclear warhead. Myanmar has a new president. U.S. sailor accused of, oh, that's ugly, tourist rape in the Navy. Central Bank has 101 million stolen in heist. News and buzz. U.S. South Korean Marines storm beach. Hostage, I appeal for my life. That sounds horrible. Chinese woman writes books with toes. That sounds sad. Seismic shift in South Korean policy toward North. I'm just twins with different fathers found. Sorry. I'm looking for anything on comedy groups bring sharp satire to India. I'm looking for anything nuclear, anything Elon Musk breaking boundaries as a career. Robert De Niro turns his eyes on Asia. Hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Yeah, okay, thanks, CNN. So, you know what I missed? I missed the science reporting on CNN. I was so obsessed with finding anything about nuclear power and the destruction of the entire world and atmosphere. I just missed they've got to have science. I mean, this is CNN. They must have crime and justice, energy, space, and science. There it'll be. The nuclear destruction will. Overdue quake may be more powerful in California. ExoMars mission aims to find life. Really? Missed the total solar eclipse? Dinosaur killing asteroid. New clues. Massive volcanoes gave Mars a makeover. You don't know anything about Mars, NASA. Milky Way map shows star-forming regions. NASA releases recordings from far side of the moon. Pluto has floating hills, NASA says. Don't trust anything NASA says. Gravitational waves detected. Absolute bullshit. NASA releases incredible images of Saturn moons. Yeah, they can take pictures. American man who went to the moon, maybe. Astronaut Scott Kelly is home. Meteorite didn't kill man in India. Astronaut Pluto surprises us. New clues about how Earth got its moon. We're remembering the challenge. This is the science section, and all I see is a bunch of NASA propaganda. SpaceX rocket explodes after landing. That sounds promising. NASA's next Mars mission is suspended. Yeah, no shit. Who has the money to go? Who has the money to go to a desert and take pictures? Orphan planet and twin Earths revealed. Do I see anything about Albert Einstein's special mark on the universe? Well, Albert Einstein was wrong about everything. What happened to Mars' water? Mars didn't really necessarily have water. Mars was machined electrically by an interaction with probably Earth. Antarctica is gaining ice, NASA. Excuse me? Antarctica is gaining ice, NASA study says? Well, that should be very, very surprising to people who are doing the Yeah, we'll get to it. Black hole smashes theories. In other words, they don't know anything about outer space, but I don't see anything about NASA. Sea levels may rise 3 feet, but I thought Antarctica was gaining ice. Oh, never mind. Nothing about Fukushima. So nothing about nuclear power. Let's just do a page search. Nothing. Nothing about nuke. There's no nuclear. Let's find Fukushima. No. Okay. Thanks, CNN. This is CNN. So you see what science covers up. Science reporting doesn't like to talk about the disaster that is nuclear power. Because when nuclear plants melt down, the first thing that melts down is the truth, said Chip Ward in a wonderful article that I put up at my website, liamscheff.com, but you can find the original if you look around. Chip Ward. Science gets almost everything wrong. Journalism gets everything wrong when it reports about science. The first thing that it gets wrong is, of course, the infectious disease. You know, it wants you to believe that HIV is the cause of AIDS, but it doesn't want to tell you that nobody has ever really proven that. Better than that, they don't actually have any tests that can capture any particular HIV thing. They have non-specific tests that come up positive for everything. Then you go on to the next test, and they say you need another test, and really you should probably have another test. And if you're in a risk group, by the way, then the test is good. And if you're not in a risk group, why are you taking these tests? You don't have HIV. But if you are in a risk group and you haven't taken the test, you probably are already infected and don't know it. Sound like mind control? That's what it is. That's how HIVology works. The gay community is an absolute captive in a Stockholm Syndrome relationship. They are the most ghettoized and captive community in America, and so they're totally brainwashed, and nobody really has any idea what to. You can't say anything reasonable to the gay community, like stop doing poppers, for example, stop doing carcinogens, stop putting carcinogens up your nose and into your lungs, things that are known to cause Kaposi sarcoma. Stop. No, you're anti-gay, you're anti-gay sex. If you tell us not to have poppers. No, not at all, actually. I just anti you getting cancer and blaming it on a phantom retrovirus and then making the rest of us pay for your fucking pills while you die horribly on the drugs that you're taking and blame everybody else for not caring enough about something that doesn't make any sense. So why don't you just stop doing the poppers and stop doing the carcinogens, stop putting benzene in your colon and find that to be incredibly healthy? Why don't you just decide to be incredibly healthy? Just decide that you're going to be incredibly healthy, stop doing carcinogenic drugs, stop taking handfuls of antibiotics, stop having lots and lots. I don't mean the whole gay community, but you guys in the fast lane, stop thinking that anonymous sex is something that you're going to do without having repercussions like real STDs. Then you go and you take antibiotics and you destroy your guts. Then you get sick. Then because you're ghettoized and indoctrinated and you have Stockholm Syndrome, you run to the HIV test clinic because it's the only thing possibly that can be wrong with you, even though you've been taking antibiotics for years. And it's definitely causing a breakdown of your mitochondria because that's what antibiotics do. And you have strange things going on in your body that you can't explain, but you've been taking dangerous antibiotics for years, and no matter what anybody says, you won't stop. And then it's all, you just know that you better take a test. That's the gay community. I have friends in there, and it's very hard to reach them. It's very, very hard. I have had years, literally years worth of conversations with people, and it goes in one ear and out the other. And the habits don't really change, and things hold on for a week or two, and the good diet goes on for a week or two, and then it's back to the grind, and it's all lost. And there's nothing anybody really pays attention to, and doing poppers here and there isn't really bad for you, and maybe I'm sick, so I'm taking more. Please stop taking the antibiotics. No, I just need this round. I'm afraid. Okay. But you're really going to have to double up on probiotics, and you're really going to have to cut out a lot of things, and you're going to have to emphasize the good fats. And then it's whole hog and, incredible, just strange workout regimens and gym bunny. Everybody goes back to being a gym bunny. So journalists don't really report on the gay community or on AIDS correctly because they don't understand the sociology or the psychology of the gay community, an isolated, ghettoized community in which everybody is a victim of the AIDS pogrom. Everybody runs around a victim of the AIDS pogrom. That's something that science journalists don't understand. They also don't get the basic technical aspects of the AIDS thing right, which is that the tests are non-specific, and you've got to choose your population on which you're going to use them, or the tests are not meant to be used. They're used according to their published literature, a Bayesian algorithm, which means that if you decide that the group that you're in has a high prevalence of the disease that you believe you're looking for, then the test is considered valid. And if the population doesn't have a high prevalence of the disease you think you're looking for, however you define it, then the test isn't supposed to be used. Does it sound like the test is valid? You've made up your mind. It's an a priori assumption, a priori. Before you understand anything about the thing, before you understand any of the technical data, you've decided that something works in a particular way, and you've made it so. Number one, make it so. And that's how it works. That's the AIDS paradigm. A paradigm that most people couldn't give two dimes about, 2 nickels about. They couldn't even give a quarter for. It's something that people don't get involved with because they don't want to, because number one, they don't want to talk about it. They don't know anybody in the gay community, or if they are in the gay community, everybody's doing it and they're taking drugs before they get sick. And if they're not in that community, they realize that it's just, they don't know anything about it. And really, it's kind of scary, so why talk about it? And straight people are lucky that they don't have the problem, so why talk about it and just wear the red ribbon and, go to Apple and buy Project Red, something for your computer, and feel good about it. And, don't worry about what nevirapine does to pregnant women in Africa. I mean, why is that your problem after all? And then if you do get into it and you realize there are problems, like the drugs kill people quickly and horribly, or slowly and horribly, and the tests don't work, and you talk about it, the population of defenders in the gay AIDS, whatever you want to call it, in AIDS propaganda, the AIDS Nazis, are so histrionic, so hysterical, so vile, so insane, so narcissistic. They cannot debate. They are worse than the vaccine defenders. I mean, quite literally worse than the vaccine defenders. And that's hard to do. They are caustic. They are, low. They call you every name in the book. That they call you Holocaust denialists. They call you murderers for not wanting you to murder people with AIDS drugs. And all you want to say is, hey, these tests don't seem to work and the drugs seem to kill people. Okay, so science journalism doesn't report on it the same way they don't report on nuclear power being deadly and Fukushima melting through the ground. This is the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio. Let's take a short pause from the conversation on other things. Yes, let's take a little break and self-promote. Let's see, what's going on? I'm writing my new book. It's called American Heretic. I'm about halfway through. I've been writing this book off and on for 2 years. I've gone through maybe 7 different drafts. I just throw them away when I don't like them. I mean, I don't work something to death thinking that it's going to give me anything. I'll work it until the point that I realize that it's not the direction I want to go in, and then I let it go. And I'm not sure why this one has been like this, except that Official Stories I seem to write in essentially the body of it in 5.5 weeks, and then I had another few weeks of light touch-up. That's not really... I mean, that happened, but that's not really exactly how it happened. What happened was that I had been working that material for 10 years. And so when I sat down to write it, I was absolutely ready to do nothing but write this book. And I did, and it poured out of me, and it flowed out of me. And I'd even written a rough draft of an idea for a book exactly a year before. And I had let it rest, and I had just worked on articles, and I'd been on the Robert Scott Bell Show a lot. And I'd been working the material in radio interviews. When I got to it, I was ready to pour it out, and so it came out like hot lava, much like the molten corium in Fukushima. Of course, that's radioactive, and the book is just instructional and maybe inspirational. So Official Stories is there on Amazon. It's still very much worth your time, and it's kind of a nice catch-up for, no, not catsup, but catch-up. There's only one. For how we got to this place in history and what it really means to talk about science, to talk about government, even to talk about English class when we talk about Shakespeare, talk about really nonsensical things like plate tectonics, the idea that the world is shrinking and expanding at exactly the same rate of speed. These are ideas that you can't really prove, and they don't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. And they're there in the book to be analyzed. American Heretic is going to have a different format. I'm going to be talking about the things that liberals get wrong, the things that religion gets wrong, and the things that journalists who write about science get wrong. And then I'm going to talk about things that the New Age gets wrong, the, what do you want to call the movement, the Burning Man movement, the, the hopeful spiritualists of the day. I don't really know what to call them. The collective evolution people, let's call them that, what they get wrong. And I'm, going to try to be reasonable and fair about what they get right, too. It's not just a hate screed. But I'm there to tell us that we're heading into a collapse, and these are the things to pay attention to. And by the end of the book, hopefully you'll want to go grow food and raise bunnies or tilapia or something else and get busy in the natural environment. So support independent journalism, put $1 or $2 into my PayPal, buy a couple of books, hand them out to friends. Let's go back to the show. And welcome back to the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV, Truth Frequency Radio. That wasn't really a break, it's just a pause for us to collect our thoughts. We started with the idea that journalists don't cover science correctly. We quickly segued into a nuclear story that should have you wondering how we're going to survive, and we're not. I moved jauntily into the next segment, which is about AIDS and how it's not covered and how it's not reported and why it's not reported. How nobody really has the guts to just say what's happening, which is you have a very small, captive, rather deranged population that's been murdered and self-murdered and suicided over the last, 3 decades that can't seem to move away from its Nazi Stockholm Syndrome abusive adopted stepfather in the National Institutes of Health that gives it all of its tests and drugs. And the gay community, not the whole community, but the very activist arm in AMFAR and ACT UP, if that exists anymore, that are hidden inside of these groups, drive the thing and keep it going. The vaccine thing is another plank of science or so-called science that is not covered in any reasonable way by journalists. If journalists wanted to cover the science of vaccines correctly, it would be fairly simple to do. You could just look at the papers that indicate the negative reactions, the negative responses to the ingredients in vaccines. It doesn't seem to be that hard. It's not mind-boggling. It's not calculus, aka rocket science. It's not advanced theoretical geometry, aka the Schwarzschild solution to black holes. We'll get there. It's nothing that should really test the mettle of, well, and here's the problem, of most journalists. Well, most journalists seem to me to be people who barely passed their liberal arts degrees and just mostly were high, drunk, or on some sort of pharmacological cocktail for depression and suicidal idealization in college. They got out. I don't know what they want. They want to be famous for being somebody who wrote something about somebody else, which is strange. I suppose there are a few idealists who want to uncover the truth about things and want to try to shine a light on the ignominies of our era, of the terrible things going on, of the people being abused, and they think that by doing that they'll improve the world. I hear you. I feel for you. I might have even have been one of those people for a moment until that part of my heart was rendered black and obsolete by the surgical strike of the AIDS establishment through the New York Times and other journals that seek to cover up the murder of children in New York orphanages. You can look that story up. It's called the Incarnation Children's Center. And I realize that journalism has no chance of doing any good when it's in the mainstream and no chance of doing any good when it's in the minor stream. The only thing you can do is try to tell what you think is true to people who you think probably already want that information. You certainly can't change many minds with it. Journalism is like entertainment. It feeds its target audience. When you realize that, it's much easier to negotiate the world. And it seems to be, you also have to lose some of your cheeky idealism. I certainly did, and it hurt. Nevertheless, it would seem that if you wanted to tell the truth about vaccines, you could, if you wanted to do real journalism about vaccines, you could by simply asking that we, journalists, independent or mainstream, were tasked to read the data on the positive benefits the many, many positive benefits, which they're sure must be there because everybody's pro-vaccine, or of course the rare detrimental deleterious effects of, well, they're not that rare. I mean, if we were going to be fair, if science journalists were going to do their job, you'd think they would be tasked with doing that simple job of reading the data. No, not Mr. Data. Mr. Data, what are you doing with what are you doing with Ensign Troy? Captain, there's a sad alien off the port bow. I believe it has sand in its butthole. Sorry, I meant to say vagina. Anyway, Star Trek callback, anyone? Star Trek called anybody? Yes. Yes, it's not a ridiculous show. Actually, Star Trek is about as ridiculous as what happens at NASA. So, moving on from vaccines, it would seem that if science journalists were sincere and serious, they could very simply do their job of figuring out, read the critical literature. It's not that hard. You read the critical literature, you read the pro and the con. So what's the con? What's the negative? What is the negative stuff on vaccines? It's endless. All you have to do is look up anything from the age of chemistry and find out what the negative stuff about aluminum or mercury is. And then you're right there at home. You can find stuff about injecting polysorbate or, let's see, what's the other one? Squalene into the body. You can look at what happens when you inject cellular material or mycoplasmas in the body. You can do all kinds of research and report it. Instead of saying there is no evidence that vaccines don't cause any problem or autism, you could just say, do the ingredients in vaccines in the human body cause any problems? And the answer is not even remotely controversially yes. It exists over and over and over and over again, dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds of times. You can find this over and over again in the history of the chemical, biochemical, and medical literature. So if science journalists wanted to do their job, and I thought their job was to be dispassionate and fair, and not support the petrochemical devils and gods. But of course, their job is to support the petrochemical gods and devils. That's all their job is. That's all they're supposed to do. All they're supposed to do is support the industry that makes all of the poison. And of course, that's what they do because that's what they're tasked to do. Moving on, there are other fields of inquiry which should be investigated more thoroughly. Every time the CDC or WHO pulls a pandemic scare out of its bunghole, Mr. Data, why? We'll get there. The journalistic class, we people making pronouncements to the public about stuff that we're reading in the effort of providing information for public consumption should most definitely say what the evidence is. Not what the press releases are, but what the evidence is. And the evidence isn't that somebody found a couple of sick kids here or there, or some sick people in a district in Hong Kong, and therefore all the birds or pigs in the world should be slaughtered. But that what was happening, what was the toxicological landscape, what was happening in the area, were there any chemicals being sprayed? Is it an area where Agent Orange was used very widely not so long ago, where dioxin is still in the environment? These things should immediately come into focus. We should have essentially punch-counterpunch, or the basic pro and con that you're supposed to have in any fair, logical conversation. But of course, that's not what science journalism is. And it's important to know that. It's very important to know that, or you'll be deceived, you'll be confused. What's next on the agenda? Well, we've got all of outer space. I was hoping we would get there. Number one, what are you doing in the holodeck with Ensign Troy? Well, donkey punches. Oh, too much information. TMI. TMI number one. Keep it to yourself. Outer space is supposed to be the realm of physics, astrophysics, and geometry, and rocket science, calculus. It's supposed to be the realm of astute, careful, dispassionate, what we call science. And science journalists are supposed to report on findings that can be corroborated and supported by something we'll politely call a fact, But that's not what's happening in science. What's happening in science journalism is that all of the science fiction that happens in NASA is reported as being true. This is a problem because the science fictions in NASA are enormous, absolutely enormous, and they never really end. Science journalism doesn't report the truth about nuclear power because it's devastating. It doesn't report the truth about AIDS because it's devastating. It doesn't report the truth about vaccines because it's absolutely devastating. So why doesn't it report the truth about NASA and astronomy? It shouldn't be devastating for us to think that Big Bang is really essentially a religious plank that's been supported by billions of dollars of wasted money. And there it is. Hundreds of billions of dollars of money, and that seems to matter to people when you put it in a newspaper, 150, 350. What's the AIDS thing up to now? 200, 300 billion dollars wasted? The science fictions of outer space at NASA have racked up that kind of figure in total consumption. And all we have to show for it are, some, wireless transponders and some improved ground-based technology, Velcro, Tang, dehydrated meals, very expensive space movies. We don't have a good understanding of space from NASA. We have a better understanding from plasma physics or the IEEE International Electrical Engineers Association, whatever that would be. We have an understanding of outer space from people who look at plasma, but plasma, which is electromagnetic particulate matter, it's the fourth form of matter. It's different than water, it's different than gas, and it's different than a solid. It conforms to its own rules. It's ruled by the electromagnetic force. Plasma is electromagnetic material, ionized material, stuff that's either donating or losing. It's either free electrons or stuff that's lost electrons, so they have charges, either negative or positive. And these things respond in ways different than gases do or than liquids do. They form shapes, the shapes of galaxies, the tissue-like veils of nebulae, the filamentary fingers of other nebulae, the currents of Birkeland currents, the plasmic jellyfish sort of shapes of the aurora. We see plasma all the time in photos of outer space. We see it on Earth in fire. We see it. We see low glow plasmas in neon lights. We see arc plasmas in lightning. It's something that we can work with in laboratories. Anybody with a neon light at home can work with plasma. You could, I suppose, work with an arc welder, though I wouldn't recommend it. But plasma is something that we can understand by basic home scientific experiment. You get one of those, those mystery balls that lights up. When you put your fingers on it, you become part of a conductor for the ions, the flowing electrons and ions. Well, that's a plasma ball. You can get that at, kind of a Spencer's gift kind of thing. Well, that's plasma too. So we're all familiar with plasma. We've seen it all our lives. And that is what makes and shapes outer space. But NASA doesn't allow it. And journalism doesn't report on it. Journalism takes a very dim view on anything that contradicts the official story of biblical Genesis, aka the Big Bang. Well, this doesn't make any bloody sense because science is supposed to be dispassionate and non-religious. In fact, science is the most religious thing going. I mean, the Catholic Church has nothing on NASA. NASA's budget, NASA's earnings, the NIH, the CDC, the WHO, all put together, the Academies of Infectious Disease, the Journals of Science, the National Science Foundation, the National Academy of Science, all of these things which tell us what we're allowed to call science are making billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions, eventually trillions of dollars. And so if you go up to them and say, the track that you're on is incorrect, you're politely, to say it politely, shoving over their apple cart. Well, more than apples, these are golden apples, and they're worth a lot of golden parachutes too. They don't like it. But NASA is sitting on a number of things that are absolute fictions. And journalists, if they were going to do what they should do, would go up and say, look, it's very nice that you believe that first there was nothing which exploded. But that's not a theory. You can't test it, therefore it's not theoretical. It's not an hypothesis. You can't test it. You can't make it a theory. It's a story. Now, how did you get the story? And if you review the reality on how they got the story, you have to go look at a priest named Georges Lemaitre who was convinced, in biblical Genesis that was true. he wanted to marry his major study in life. He again was an abbé in the Roman Catholic Church of Belgium, very high-ranking position, very devoted to these ideas, these ancient Babylonian myths that are in the Hebrew Judeo-Christian Bible. And he wanted to demonstrate these true to some degree, so he argued it. Well, it was reviled, and I think, and if I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry, I think Fred Hoyle, a famous astronomer, laughed and said, "Oh, it's like a Big Bang, you guys, you're just remaking Genesis." And the name stuck, and so we're stuck with the name, the Big Bang. In other words, it doesn't mean anything. It's like a big joke. Well, how did you get this primordial atom that makes everything? Well, now NASA's busy trying to answer that question. It's a nonsense question. I mean, it's pure C.S. Lewis. It's Jabberwocky. How did nothing explode? How did everything come from nothing? It's a nonsense question. It's Coddleton Pie. It's nonsense verse. It doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't. But NASA has been spending all of your money, tax money, for decades trying to demonstrate something about this question. And in order to do so, it's come up with more Jabberwockies. It's come up with more monsters at the bottom of the fishbowl to weld it together and make it go around like Ptolemy's epicycles. Well, there was once a guy named Ptolemy, and he said the Earth was the center of the universe and the center of the solar system. And in order to make it so in a model, he had to put the planets on these little tracks, and he had to have the tracks do double and triple spins wherever the planets didn't conform to the tracks. Because if you put the Earth in the center, the planets don't move as they should, as we see them in the sky. And in order to get them to move as you see them in the sky, you have to totally change their actual elliptical and circular rotations around the sun, which is the center of the solar system, the largest body in our solar system by far. But the church wanted the Earth to be the center because they're narcissistic, egocentric fuckwads. There's my curse word of the show. Enjoy it, savor it, smoke it. And they couldn't imagine that we weren't the center of everything, because that's how narcissists are. The same with the flat earthers. They're narcissists. They're not paying attention to anything about, ellipses or the rotation of the moon around the Earth, or the solar cycle, the lunar cycle, or even seasons. None of that has to work for them in their narcissist model. Well, they're rejecting NASA to some degree without understanding why they're rejecting NASA. They just know that something's screwy with NASA. Well, something is screwy with NASA. Big Bang doesn't make any sense. Ptolemaic epicycles don't make any sense. In Big Bang cosmology, first there was nothing which exploded. Now let's explain it. Doesn't make any sense. Well, they have a model, and they have a big bang, and then they have a big expansion, because things don't work out exactly as they should if you just have a big bang. And then you have to have dark matter to weld things in a particular spot. Then you have to have dark energy to push them away from a particular spot when you need that to happen. Then you need to have string theory to explain why something which exploded should have any particular shape at all. Well, what is the shape of? The shape is of plasma. The shape is of plasma flowing through galactic centers. These pinwheels on the daisy chain of plasma going through, as Walt Thornhill says, like Catherine wheels. The rotation of galaxies holding together across hundreds or thousands of light years, giant stars, millions and trillions of miles away from each other, spinning in conjunction with stars. Stars in the center, stars on the outside having to spin so much faster to keep track of with stars on the inside, but doing it as though the thing were welded together. It doesn't make any sense if gravity is holding them together. But the electromagnetic force of plasma is 1,000 trillion times stronger than gravity. Is that good enough for you? Science journalism doesn't touch plasma. It doesn't understand it. And the people writing for the Sky and Telescope or Discover or Astronomy magazines, Popular Science, don't understand that they shouldn't be saying more mysteries in the sky, black holes, break all theories, what we saw on CNN. No, got to throw out all our theories, black hole. There are no black holes. Well, okay, let's move on. There was no Big Bang. It's a plasma universe. It has no beginning and end that anybody can see. And the shapes of galaxies, the shapes of stars, the shapes of nebulae, the forms that we see in outer space, and the electrical flow out of the sun and into the sun, the magnetic flow into the Earth and out of the Earth, all relate to plasma and electromagnetism. None of them relate to just gravity, which shouldn't have any electromagnetic effects at all. None. okay, so now they look at these galactic centers, and they're hot, bright, and they seem to just be glowing eternally, and they even seem to spit things out, like quasars or mini galaxies. They seem to spit things out. They're energetic cores, and they're hucking things out, and it doesn't make any sense. Well, no, there's more to the story, by the way. I mean, if you want to argue about red shift and blue shift, we can do that, but that was disproven a long time ago. There's the big bangers held on to two pieces of information which showed up conveniently, and they decided meant that their model was true. They decided that things that had a slight red color through big telescopes were really far away because they were really old, and that meant that they came out first from the Big Bang, and things that were a little more blue or less red were a little younger and therefore closer. Well, it turns out when you look through the big telescopes that big objects, which are very more blue or younger, have objects which are very red or older in front of them. Well, that shouldn't be the case if that's what those colors mean, but it's not what they mean. It's not what they mean, so red shift and blue shift has been thrown out. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue shift, it's gone. The other thing is background radiation, and the background radiation is from the stars and the electrical plasma networks in our area. You always get synchrotron radiation from strong electromagnetic currents. So it's not a big surprise that there's local radiation. It's not left over from one primordial bang. So those two ideas, those half-witted, secondary ideas, which aren't proofs, by the way, which are meaningless bits of assertion, which are so interpretive of us, they need to be so interpreted as to lose total value, are what bangers held on to for a long time, but they're both gone. Nevertheless, the journals keep reporting on Big Bang. Okay, you can bury Big Bang. It's nonsense. It really is religion disguised as science. Moving on, they didn't just abandon Big Bang, they supported it by inventing new space monsters. One of those was black holes. Black holes was something that was played with as an idea, as a totally mathematical concept. And by the way, Einstein is really to blame here, because Einstein ruined astronomy for a lot of people, and people were willing to have it be ruined, so it's a group gefilte fish. Einstein's idea of space is totally incorrect. He says there's no ether. There is an ether. There is material in outer space. There's an ether. He says that gravity bends light. Gravity doesn't bend light. Light moving around an object which has an ether will appear to bend a little bit because it's going through the ether, which moves around the object due to gravity. So it will appear to bend slightly around an object because the ether around the object, or atmosphere around the object, will of course distort the light going around it, because gravity is shaping or both gravity and the electromagnetic, which is probably an electromagnetic force too, is shaping the ether or environment of something that is being looked at through a telescope. Also, the idea that light is bent is based on, a lot of inference and kind of hopeful data. No, not that data. Mr. Data, what are you doing in the holodeck again? Well, Captain, Einstein's ideas are pure science fiction, that if you get in a spaceship and you go away and you travel at light speed and you come back, you'll be much younger than somebody who stayed on Earth who was, the same age when you left. Nonsense. If you take off in a spaceship and nobody can travel at light speed, and you go near light speed around the Earth, around the solar system, with the Earth for 3 years, when you land, you'll be 3 years older and totally radioactive, of course, because you'll have been bombarded by so many particles, and people on Earth will be 3 years older. They say that they've proven time dilation by flying big planes very quickly around the planet in different directions, but they of course forget something, that clocks, even atomic clocks, are subject to movement and speed and gravity, so it doesn't really work. Their idea that time dilates is like saying that if you take an hourglass to the top of the Eiffel Tower, or even further into above the atmosphere, where gravity is very low, the time has slowed down because the sand ceases to fall. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. They actually say it's the other way, and that somehow when you go up there, time speeds up for people down here on Earth. It's a series of nonsensical non sequiturs that have nothing to do with what anybody's ever experienced or what anybody's ever seen in outer space. It's where physics and astrophysics essentially went to die. It went to this make-believe place called Einsteinville. And we've been stuck there. It's all crap. saying energy equals the mass times the speed of light squared is crap. The speed of light is not necessarily 186,000 miles per second. That's a number that somebody came up with, but the speed of light seems to be variable depending on the medium that it's going through. In other words, the medium is is as important in some ways as the particle or the wave. That's something not really understood in conventional physics because they don't consider space to be a medium. On the other hand, Einstein said there's really no such thing as space, they're just curves. And there's no ether, they're just curves. So gravity is a function of a curve instead of gravity being what it is, an electromagnetic function of, radially packed molecules and atoms, forming a large body, which is probably what it is and why it's strongest at the surface of the body and weakest as you get further away. Well, physics is pretty lost. Astrophysics is definitely lost. And we can go through all of these things again with more time, and we can take more time with them and think about them more and more and more. But let's just finish with black holes. Black holes were invented as a mathematical idea, something called the Schwarzschild solution, which is the question: can you have a density of a point of infinite density? Well, of course you can't have a point of infinite density. Nothing is infinite in the universe except the universe itself. But there are no infinite points of infinite density. Well, they wrote a mathematical solution to it called the Schwarzschild solution, and then it was modified by somebody else. But the Schwarzschild solution was based on the premise that in every universe, and we only have one, you only get one of these exceptions. Well, they modified it so you could have as many exceptions as you want. Now, astronomers, whenever they don't understand what's out there, put a Schwarzschild solution there and call it a black hole and say, well, there's a big bit of light there that we can't understand. There's light and heat there that we don't understand. The galaxy's holding together in a way that we don't understand. It's brighter and hotter than anything. There must be a black hole that we don't see that's creating enough force to pull material in to create friction that creates multi-million degree temperatures. Really? Wouldn't it make more friction? I mean, you're talking about taking a broom and waving it in the air to make a fire instead of just using lightning, electromagnetism, which is lightning. Instead of just using plasma. So that's where outer space is. And science journalists could do a lot by just studying plasma, but they don't. And they don't study nuclear power, and they don't study any other thing. This is the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio. Thanks for tuning into this hour. In the next hour, we're going to do a repeat of the show on Robert Oppenheimer, which was banned from YouTube, and then put back without any apology made to yours truly, your humble narrator, Liam Scheff. Please support independent journalism and this kind of thinking by putting $5, $10, $20 into the kitty on PayPal or buying official stories on Amazon.com to keep the work coming. And we're in the run-out groove. What can I tell you? In the next hour, we're going to talk about Robert Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer was the father of the nuclear bomb, the Manhattan Project. He could have been described as an artist and a peacenik, as a poet, as many things. He was, it was pointed out to me in a comment, also, I think justly accused of having tried to poison one of his professors at Oxford under strange circumstances. So perhaps he was always unstable and always a little bit insane. We can visit Robert Oppenheimer another time. I want to put this up because this was the thing apparently that got me taken off of, got a show taken off of YouTube without explanation or with no real explanation. And then it was put back without any explanation. So I think it's worth revisiting because it's worth understanding that the atomic bomb and Fukushima are connected. That the nuclear disaster that we're living in is connected to the future that we're not going to, that's going to be increasingly radioactive. Let's take a short break and we'll be back with the second hour of the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio. Welcome back to the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio. We're going to do it's a Flashback Wednesday. I'm going to 2.5 years ago. I did a show on Robert Oppenheimer. The show received a little bit of attention lately because YouTube took it down and then put it back up after I complained and asked them why. Julius Robert Oppenheimer is the father of the atomic bomb. He was a physicist. He ran the Manhattan Project. I describe him in this show as being a very literate guy, being a man who could read in many languages. He also apparently tried to kill one of his teachers, tried to poison one of his teachers, I believe at Oxford. That was pointed out to me this week. And I did not know that. Might revisit that in a future show. But let's not wait on ceremony. Here is the show. From 2.5 years ago, talking about nuclear power. Yes, Fukushima is 5 years old. This is halfway through the current disaster. Julius Robert Oppenheimer, born in 1904. Born in 1904, before there was even a concept of a nuclear weapon. Died in 1967. Before the Summer of Love, by the way. Was an American theoretical physicist, which is mostly crap, theoretical physics. I want to talk a little about the difference between theoretical, hypothetical, and Narnia. Most of what people call physics today really qualifies as C.S. Lewis. It really is Narnia. It's about that real. It's less real than, I don't know, Captain Kangaroo. And a professor of physics at the University of California, Berkeley, along with Enrico Fermi. He is often called the father of the atomic bomb for his role in the Manhattan Project, the World War II project to develop the first nuclear weapon. We'll talk a little about Robert by the way, Robert Oppenheimer. I find the J instructive. Enrico Fermi, also an interesting character. Both of these guys hyper-specializing in figuring out what to do with radioactive material. There was no radioactive material in bunches at that point. How much radioactive material is there right now after 100 years of, well, much less than that actually, 60 years of mining, the 70 years of mining the stuff around the world? The mainstream, and as of 2002, the mainstream said that there were 77,000, does anybody know, pounds? Does anybody want to guess? 77,000 what? Tons of spent nuclear fuel. Sitting around the United States, not the world, the United States. 77,000 times 2 is 150,000. 100 times 2, 150, 77,000, carry the 0, times 2,000. Oh my God. 77,000 tons times 2,000 pounds. Are we talking metric or short? Doesn't really matter. We got this sitting around in the United States in spent fuel pools. At Vermont Yankee Power Plant, they've got hundreds and hundreds, over 640 tons of radioactive material. Anywhere that there's a nuclear power plant, there is spent nuclear fuel. How did we get to this point? All right, maybe this is too negative. Maybe this is, maybe you don't want to hear this. Maybe you think that we're headed for a new age, an age of Aquarius. Maybe you think that we're turning around and we're going to have a new enlightened age and we're going to all figure it out. And there's a turning point. We're all headed to a turning point, right? We're headed. I was talking to a guy today. Oh, we're headed to a peak moment. You know, this is the Kali Yuga, and you know we're going to have more photons in the air, and so we're all going to be illuminated. Things are going to get better. You'll see. And I retorted with, but there are nuclear power plants all over the world, hundreds of them. There are millions of pounds at this point of radioactive material all over the world just sitting around in spent fuel pools like the ones at where? Fukushima. Where's the out? Where do we get better? Where's the solution place? No, just take me there. I mean, walk me through it. Find me. Find my way. You know, help me. So we're talking, and he's telling me this, and the Kali Yuga and the Enlightenment, and I said, well, it's a great story, but it is a story after all. I like the Kali Yuga as a story, it has its metaphorical values. It's part of, I want to say, the Upanishads, but it's part of a Hindu concept of time, and time is broken into these four immense multi-100,000-year periods of time, multi-million-year periods of time, in which things get better, and then they're fine, and then they're golden, and then they're a little worse, and then they're crap. And you want to make a wager? You want a little joke? Okay, when do you think we live? Right, okay, the Kali Yuga. Of course, but it's been the Kali Yuga for all of humanity as far as anybody's concerned. It's always been the Kali Yuga because we're a weird species. Maybe this doesn't get much better. Maybe we've laid mousetraps all over the house and we're blind and we can't see where they are. Maybe we just don't have any concept of what we're doing. Maybe the ship doesn't get into port. We have to leave this as a going proposition, that the ship doesn't make it into port. I know that people never like saying that sort of thing, but there is a possibility that the ship, the human species, doesn't make it, that we run to lifeboats. And you know what happens when the ship goes down and you run to lifeboats? A lot of people don't make it. Some people say, I'm not going to make it, and they bring out their violin and they play a happy tune on the way into their icy grave. Nobody knows, but I think that we do know that with 3 nuke... Now, I know it's not on CNN and it's not on Google News, but the reality is that 3 nuclear meltdowns helped with this stuff they call corium, for all the crap that is melted in the core. It's not that complicated. Melting at thousands of degrees. The reason that nuclear fission was such a great idea for these guys was because it's so damn powerful. It's so immensely powerful. They thought, we can power the world forever with this stuff. We took a few pounds of this stuff, and we made a 22 megaton explosion worth 22,000 tons of dynamite. This is incredible. We vaporized islands in the Bikini Atoll. We in the Pacific, we vaporized them. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. We threw hundreds of thousands of tons of seawater and sand 6 miles into the air. Of course we can make some electricity with this stuff. Can you see the wheels turning in their head? I want you to watch a movie called Trinity and Beyond. I want you to go and watch this film. Not right now. Come on, have a little... All right, go ahead. Do it right now. I mean, if you will just wait till the show's over. It's on YouTube. You can find it for free on YouTube. You could buy it if you wanted to. It's called Trinity and Beyond. What was Trinity? I know the Holy Trinity. You have the Trinities in the Hindu mysticism. You have it in the Muslim, Christian. You have it in all the mystical. 3 is the magic number. All that kind of stuff. Why Trinity? Why did they pick Trinity? Why did J. Robert Oppenheimer pick Trinity for the name? Because J. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, was a poet. He was an intellectual. He was a lover of art and culture. He was Jewish. He had no political affiliation for most of his young life. He just ignored the newspaper, and he spoke 6 languages. He read ancient Sanskrit. He read books in their native languages. He could read German and, I suppose, any other language of the European continent that he wanted to. Listen, I'm bright. This guy was levels of genius. I genuinely feel a little kinship with him, which is a little bit weird, but his love of art and poetry and language, he was a multi-talented linguist. I don't know if he was a cunning linguist, but the girls liked him too. Oh, Liam, you bastard. He went to an ethical culture society school. He went to Harvard and killed their program in 3 years, went right through it. He could have done anything with his life. He became interested in physics, in the movement of objects. Then he became interested in what kind of physics? Not molecular, atomic, submolecular. I mean, this was the new thing. And he was the smartest guy in every room. He was arrogant. He was very high on himself. He seemed to fancy himself to be a kind of royalty. And maybe he kind of was, or would have been in another era. But there's there's a line that comes out of Lord Acton. Lord Acton was an aristocrat in England who never wrote a book, but he made copious notes in all the history books that he read at that point. And there were many history books to be read at that point in English history. I'm going to put it in the 18th century. I hope that's about right. But of course, he could go through the works of, Gibbon. That was certainly published at that point. The Histories of the Roman Empire, History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Many volumes of very wordy, erudite, poetical stuff. An inspiration for Winston Churchill, another strange guy. The works of Gibbon. So Lord Acton read and read and read, and he made notes, consider them post-it notes in all the books, and he is famous for his post-it notes, or his annotations. And his most famous annotation is this: almost all great men are bad men. Almost all great men are bad men. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's a pithy little skeleton key to understanding the world. Ask yourself if it isn't true. We'll use yours truly as an example. I, Liam Scheff. So let's say that I've got this little show and somebody hears it and they say, well, you have a talent for oratory. We want to give you, we're going to give you an honorary professorship and a weekly show that you can do on weekends, or you decide, and it'll be on NPR. It'll be the flagship show on NPR. And I say, well, NPR, they really suck a lot of government teat. I don't know. Okay, never mind NPR. Why don't we put you on, we could just put you on CNN radio or Fox radio. I don't want to be on Fox radio with O'Reilly. Yeah, that's actually good counterbalance for you. Well, I don't know. Well, it's going to be $40,000 a year an episode. What? $40,000 an episode? Yeah, imagine all the good you could do with that. No, I could do a lot of good with that. I could fund, I know all these independent journalists and all these great researchers, and I could fund a lot. Yeah, sure you could. You could write it off as a tax write-off. Of course you could. Of course you could. So do you want the job? What do I have to do? You just do a weekend show, and you sign this contract, and you just do a weekend show. Weekend show and what? Whatever you want, whatever, headlines, just headlines. And you bring that particular wit, that charm, and that bluster, and that irony. Bring that irony. Just like, you kind of a Jon Stewart, but with substance, you can do it. You really, you can. $40,000 an episode. Are you guys kidding me? I've never had that kind of money. I've never seen that kind of money. I don't even know what it would look like. I could do a lot of good. Maybe I could even fund a Fukushima cleanup project. That's a lot of $40,000 an episode. I could at least start an international. All right, now listen. What's the contract say? Well, just read it or have your lawyer read it. They're just some non-disclosure agreements, and you don't want to bash the network. After all, they are paying you. And okay, I understand. All right. Power corrupts. Absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Everybody's got a price tag. And the price tag may not be money. It may be that they don't kill you or somebody that you love, or reveal the picture of you having sex with a goat or whatever you did that drunken weekend in college. You understand this. Just make the offer. And somebody is bought and sold. Look at Hillary Clinton. Girl goes to Wellesley. Clearly, to my eyes, a gigantic lesbian. I'm not even slight. Now, this is just my opinion, and I have to say that for legal purposes. It's just my opinion, but she seems to be just so clearly gigantic lesbian who would have been much happier being a lesbian. And she meets this guy, and I understand sexual orientation is something that's challenged to figure out as you go through life. You can be very confused. Society doesn't really allow you to explore it, especially in that era. And so I don't mind that, somebody can make a mistake. But she sees this guy, and he's headed for power, and he's got the Cecil Rhodes Scholarship. He's the boy from Hope. And she pins she just latches on to her wagon, and that star are one. And she makes a deal with herself. And the deal, now this is just, I know, maybe I shouldn't say, well, it's too late, I've said her name. And if you don't think she's lesbian, if she's not a lesbian, my apologies to her for seeming like a giant lesbian. She seems to me to be, that she'd enjoy the company of girls better than that of, anyway. Imagine then that she says to herself, I could do such things for women. I could take the hit myself and not have the life that I want. And I know this guy's a bit of a dog. I'm not stupid, says Hillary Clinton, lesbian or not, to herself. But this guy captures the room. And that turns me on, she says. That's what turns me on. So maybe she's not a lesbian. Maybe she's turned on by power. Maybe there are people who are just turned on by power. And so Lord Acton's statement, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, is especially true for those with a predilection, predisposition to be turned on by, you got it, power. Absolute power. J. Robert Oppenheimer did not have political power. He had great intellectual power. He was always the smartest guy and really one of the most interesting in the room. And don't get me wrong, I've not been that guy and I've been that guy. You know, I mean, I understand being bright and being able to turn a conversation and have the excitement of the intellectual process take over and people get sucked in and it's a grand old time. I get it. I do. And I am multilingual. I don't speak 6 languages and I didn't study Sanskrit. So this guy had a number of legs up on all of us. So how did he become the guy who built the bloody nuclear bomb? He was apolitical. He didn't care. He was interested in the arts and horseback riding and outdoors, and he liked to smoke his cigarettes. And then an interesting thing happened. The Nazi Party began to have power in Europe, in Germany. The communist movement came into vogue among intellectuals in America. Intellectuals who had no concept of what was going to come, by the way, under Stalin or under Mao. They weren't aware of the long pogroms against the people of China and Japan by their own communist parties. This wasn't in their minds. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not fair to say that everybody who ever affiliated with the notion of communism somewhere in the 40s or 30s or 50s was some sort of totalitarian monster. They might have been turned on as people get turned on by the arguments of Code Pink or something, Doctors Without Borders. You know, they want to invoke a concept of freedom. So they should say, oh well, we want freedom for everybody. And if you're young and you're naive, and you say, well, the communists promise freedom for everybody, and everybody gets a vote, and there's no, there's just the heads of the party, but anybody can become head of the party. And say, well, okay, that sounds much actually more like the democracy that we were supposed to have. You can say in your head, it's not. But that's not because communism is evil. It's because people are tribal and hierarchical, and we always fall apart in large groups. We always actually fall in to the tribal hierarchical system. So you've got the Clintons become kings of the world and buddy-buddy with the Bush. You don't think that they actually like the Bushes, do you? I mean, Bill Clinton probably would have said, I'd rather be dead when he was in college than hang out with people like the Bushes. But they're buddy-buddy when it's time for the photo ops because they're masters of the universe. They're commanding the heights. They are commanding the heights in their minds. There's even a notion of that in a documentary produced in the aughts, in the zeros or the late 90s or the early 2000s by Frontline, called Commanding the Heights. Bill Clinton's prominently featured. So it must have been earlier during his presidency, about the great monetary revolutions that occurred in Southeast Asia. Simply by what? By exporting all manufacturing from the United States to them, by changing the relationship of banking, by making fractional reserve currency even more fractional, by being able to bet on mortgages. I mean, mortgages became a kind of dollar that you could invest in. In other words, people who didn't have money to pay for a house would take out a loan, and then you could bet on that loan. Because we're crazy. There's something that happens with human beings in large groups. There's a quote, and I can't recall it exactly, but it has been said that men tend to go mad in groups. Indeed, it will be seen that they go mad in herds, and they only regain their sanity one at a time. I think that that's absolutely the truth. So I'm not waiting for the Great Awakening. I do like talking to the people who I seem to have a lot in common with and who get it. But I'm not telling you that the ship is going to come into port and that we're all going to make it. I don't think that that's the case. So, have your spiritual life and and keep those fires burning. I think that we all need them this difficult century. After all, Salon.com, as we talked about in hour one, is now getting on board with collapse of fornication. We're heading into collapse, and even Salon.com, the Time magazine of the Jon Stewart set, is understanding that. They're getting some of the details wrong, but they're getting it. So J. Robert Oppenheimer didn't get turned on by politics until Hitler started making a move in Europe. Isn't that interesting? And the communists opposed the socialists. They opposed the Nazis, I should say. Interesting. So Hitler helped create Julius, first name. I know, very powerful historical name. Julius, named after his father, Robert Oppenheimer, we'll just call him Robert. Hitler helped create the guy who created the atomic bomb. Because Oppenheimer didn't care much for politics until Jews were being actively persecuted in Europe. And then he did. And then he took his great intellect and his multilingual skills and his fascination and love of the arts and the atom and the molecule and the electron, and he applied it when a General Groves, I want to say his name was Leslie, but I might be getting that wrong. Yeah, Leslie Groves, Brigadier General Leslie Groves. Until Leslie Groves, who helped build the Pentagon, by the way, approached this man, the outlier, the absolute outlier, a guy who was already under some suspicion. He's teaching at Caltech or UC Berkeley or both, teaching this, physics of the atom. Unfortunately, they call it theoretical physics, and we'll talk about that in a second. Physics of the atom, cutting-edge work, really, truly cutting-edge work. Some of it is giving into total BS, like, eventually supporting Big Bang Theory, which is crap, or black holes, which is crap. But some of it's quite real, and you can do real science with it. You can actually manipulate atoms. There is something quite real about that. And he became fascinated, and Groves approached him and said, "You're our guy." And Oppenheimer said, "Well, and Groves said, "You can be the guy, a leader of men like me," said General Groves, "to run this group of we need a group of scientists. We know that they're all going to be lefties with various anti-government, anti-war sentiments. And you artist, you horseback rider, you multilingual man of letters and speaker of many tongues and traveler of the world, we need you to corral these scientists. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. We need you to corral these scientists. These people who would have nothing to do with government or bomb making, and we need you to bring them, because the Nazis will have this bomb if we don't make it." And so he did. And these people went to Los Alamos, and they built an encampment, the army built an encampment, and the scientists moved in, and they spent a number of, I want to say, years in secret telling their loved ones nothing about what they were really doing. So don't tell me people in power, even liberals, can't keep secrets. They can. And they built Trinity. Why Trinity? Why Trinity? Why Trinity? Because Oppenheimer was literal. He was literate, I should say. He read many, many books, and he read of many spiritual traditions, including the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, probably the Vedas, the Upanishads. He later said this name I'm reading was from John Donne's Holy Sonnets. According to the historian Greg Herkin, this naming could have been an allusion to Jean Tatlock, who had committed suicide a few months previously. That was his communist communist lover. and had in the 1930s introduced Oppenheimer to John Donne's work. So we're talking about a spiritual, romantic, poetic tradition. The first nuclear bomb test was named after John Donne's Holy Sonnets. Do you begin to understand some of the trouble that we face as a species? We can take the best of us, poetry, and apply it to the most insane, the explosion of a nuclear fissioning device in the desert of New Mexico, spreading tritium and cesium and a radioactive cloud, a purple cloud, all over the landscape. He's a fascinating character. He's absolutely fascinating. In 1965, he said this on television: "We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried." This was after Trinity. "Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita." This is a scientist who just created the atom bomb. "Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince, Arjuna, that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, 'Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.' I suppose we all thought that, one way or another." Well, I doubt all the locals and army guys standing there thought, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of the worlds, J. Robert Oppenheimer." Not everybody really thinks in those terms. But this man, a self-aggrandizing, grandiose genius, did think in those terms. This is the Energy Show with Liam Scheff. We're talking about power, the invention of the nuclear bomb. We've been speaking about Fukushima and Chernobyl, and the absolute allergy that the mainstream has to talking about deaths from radioactive fallout. Throat clear. You're supposed to hit a mic for that sort of thing. What can we do? Let's take just 30 seconds. Let me think. This is Liam Scheff. You're listening to The Energy Show on Unbound Radio. Go to Unbound Radio to hear all the great shows all week long. Popeye, that's Federal Jack, Susan Lindauer, and many, many, many other shows that I hope to be on in the near future. You can go to you can go to federaljack.com and chime in on the chat room. Please hang out in the chat room. If you have a question, though, you can call me. Call me. 877-456-7631, 877-456-7631. What is energy? We use it every day, and nobody knows really how to measure it. Let's see. How much energy do we use? Let's just scroll through the Google here. How much energy does a power plant, a nuclear power plant? Here's an answer from Yahoo Answers. I worked at a power station that had 3 plants, 1 gas, 1 oil, and 1 was coal. The gas and oil ones were rated at about 100 megawatts. The coal plant at about 375 megawatts, and which is a million watts. Oh, okay. A megawatt is a million watts. 375 megawatts, 375 million watts. Other plants might be up to 1,000 megawatts, maybe more, depending on location. For example, huge plants are built out in Nevada, where nobody lives. Plants that would never be allowed near towns because of the noise and pollution. If you need a single number, I'd say 750 megawatts might be a good round number for the average power plant. Okay. So for future reference, we'll just peg average power plants to around 750 megawatts. We'll see. How much electricity does a typical nuclear power plant generate? This is from somewhere on the web. In 2011, the average nuclear power plant in the United States generated about 12.2 billion kilowatt hours. What did we just do? I don't understand. We just shift from megawatts to kilowatt hours. There were 65 nuclear power plants with 104 operating nuclear reactors. Did you get that? There are 65 nuclear power plants in the United States with 104 reactors in them. There are 4 reactors threatening the entire Pacific Ocean right now. Let me just divide 4 by, okay. That generated a total of 790 billion kilowatt hours. See, we've just switched from megawatts to kilowatt hours. Kind of confusing. 36 of those plants have 2 or more reactors. Palo Verde plant in Arizona has 3 reactors with the largest combined generating capacity of about 3,937. Let's call it 4,000 megawatts. We're back to megawatts. So the largest nuclear power plant gets up to about 4,000 megawatts. Fort Calhoun in Nebraska has the smallest with 478 megawatts. So from 500 to 4,000. But I don't understand. What's a megawatt? How many megawatts do we use right now? How much electricity does an American home use? Let's ask that on the web. In 2011, the average annual electricity consumption for a U.S. residential utility customer was 11,208, let's call it 11,000 kilowatt hours? Now I'm a little bit lost. An average of 940 kilowatt hours per month? How do you have a kilowatt hour per month? Louisiana had the highest annual, this is very confusing, consumption of 16,000 kilowatt hours. Maine had the lowest at 6,000. Holy mackerel. It's very difficult to figure this out. Electricity used at any moment, says the internet, is measured in watts. It only makes sense that a 100-watt light bulb uses 100 watts of electricity. A desktop computer uses 65 watts, and a central air conditioner uses 3,500 watts. Now, let me think. A megawatt was, what was that, 1,000,000 watts? Since all of the watts add up quickly, is that watts per second, per hour? The term kilowatt is used to represent 1,000 watts. To understand how much energy you're using, you also have to consider how long you run your appliances. When you use 1,000 watts for an hour, okay, that's a kilowatt hour. Okay, so a kilowatt hour is 1 hour using 1,000 watts. The ability to generate electricity is measured in watts. Watts are very small, so the term kilowatt equals 1,000 watts. Megawatt equals 1,000,000. And gigawatt equals 1,000,000,000 watts are most commonly used. Electricity production and consumption are most commonly measured in kilowatt hours. A kilowatt hour refers to 1 kilowatt, 1,000 watts of electricity produced or consumed per hour. 1 50-watt light bulb left on for 20 hours. Let's see, 50 watts, 20 hours equals 5 times 2 is 10, 2 zeros, should be 1,000. Let's see, consumes 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. 50 watts for 20 hours consumes 1 kilowatt hour or 1,000 watts. Holy crap. I don't really feel like I'm making great headway here. I'm just trying to understand how we use it. And everything we're talking about now is energy. All this nuclear stuff, they say they're using it for electricity. I don't believe it. They're using it to fund the nuclear weapons industry. But you can see with a guy like Robert Oppenheimer and Enrico Fermi. By the way, Enrico Fermi took bets on the day of Trinity, the explosion. Took bets as to whether the blast would vaporize the atmosphere of New Mexico or the planet. He was actively taking bets. He took odds. Funny guys, scientists. How many... Oh, by the way, 3 weeks or so later, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and a few days later on Nagasaki. So the scientists, the so-called scientists who were and some of them were, they didn't know, they had to finish the project, but they didn't want it to be used on anybody. I know, how bloody naive. Absolute power may corrupt absolutely, but it also blinds us to the obvious. Since when does the military build something not to use it? Sorry, it's the military. They build it to use it. 3 weeks later, they drop this thing on. That's just travel time. That's it. That's just put it on the ship. Get it across the ocean. Fly it in the airplane. 60 seconds over Tokyo. I read that book as a kid. They make these guys who drop nuclear bombs on countries seem like heroes. Japan was trying to negotiate a surrender. I know. They were negotiating. This is well understood. Japan was trying to negotiate a limited, not a total surrender. In other words, they'd get to keep the emperor and a number of other things. The United States said no go. How many homes can 1 megawatt of wind energy supply? All right, this is interesting. An average U.S. household uses about 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity each year. God, that's not really very... Okay, they put it in kilowatt hours, and then they put it in a year. And a kilowatt is already 1,000 watts, so it's 10,000 watts. An average U.S. household uses about 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity each year. So we use 10,000 of these units of electricity. A 1 megawatt, that's a million watt, wind turbine can generate, no, not a million watts, can generate between 2.4 million and 4 million kilowatt hours annually. I feel like I'm doing frickin' calculus. An average U.S. household uses about 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity each year. A 1 megawatt wind turbine can generate between 2.4 million and 4 million kilowatt hours annually. So we use 10,000 and they make 2.4 million. Okay. Therefore, one single megawatt wind turbine generates enough electricity to power 240 to 400 households. That's worth knowing. A single 1 megawatt wind turbine generates enough electricity to power 240 to 400 households. So, most wind turbines built by government are built in farms of about 50 to 100 windmills. So, let's say we build 150, here we go, example. A 150 megawatt wind project using 100 1.5 megawatt wind turbines can generate as much as 600 million kilowatt hours annually at a good site, or enough to power 50,000 typical U.S. households. So that's 100, never mind 150. We're going to build 100 windmills across an area. We can power 50,000 U.S. households. Now, I bet we can power 100,000 U.S. households if we use a lot less energy. But how many households are there in the United States? That becomes a significant question. How many windmills do we have to build? So we can power households with wind power, and wind power is not free. You have to build the thing. You have to go overseas and get the, whatever it's called, running out diem, molybdenum, molybdenum. You got to go get these rare earths, and it's very polluting. But I want to tell you, it's not as polluting. Neodymium, that's the one. I want to tell you, it's not as polluting as what? Yeah, that's right. Nuclear meltdowns. And maybe J. Robert Oppenheimer wouldn't be that turned on by windmills. I don't know. Maybe he was only interested in the atom. I'm interested in the windmill. Call me low tech. So we can build windmills, and we can power with one windmill. Did I get that right? 50 to 100 households? One big wind, not a giant windmill, a big windmill, because a giant windmill is more than a megawatt. It's a 2 or 3 megawatt windmill. That's not bad. I'm not opposed. Are you opposed? Maybe some people are opposed. No, not 50 to 100 households. 240 to 400 households. An average U.S. household uses about 10,000 kilowatt hours. Let's say that everybody has to conserve a little bit, and that we exchange our light bulbs, and we have lights put on strategically, and we don't use them all the time, and we don't run all the pumps all the time. We replace the pumps we have with more efficient pumps, and we replace the pipes we have with more efficient pipes, and that all costs money. And not everybody can do it. Let's say that we just live in the dark a little bit more, and we go to bed on time. I know, people don't want to do that. Let's say that we use light-emitting diodes. Well, light-emitting diodes, I know they're really efficient, but they do have rare earth metals in them, and that means that they're rare earth elements, and that means that they're harder to get, and they actually cost a lot to make in terms of shipping and mining and transporting. So nothing is free. There is no free lunch. But let's say that the government, our state government, says we have to run our power plant less, because this is about where we're heading. We have to run our power plant less. You, me, and everyone we know need energy. Mostly we need it not for our lights at 2 in the morning. We don't need light at 2 in the morning except in an emergency. We do need it to pump sewage. That's the most important thing. So we got to pump the sewage first, and then what's next? Then the fans, air conditioners in some places, but not everywhere. Fans are more efficient than air conditioners. And we actually could rebuild a lot of the houses pretty simply by sinking long tubes into the earth to pull up cool air and to keep warm air in the winter. You know, there are a lot of things we could do that didn't cost that much, that J. Robert Oppenheimer didn't think about, weren't that exciting and sexy. You know, you don't have to speak 6 languages and be an intellectual international genius to be able to figure out how to build a better house. And you don't need General Leslie Groves, and you don't need to be Enrico Fermi making bets about whether the atmosphere disappears or not to figure out how to run a little bit of electricity in the world. Oppenheimer, by the way, after the war, opposed the atomic bomb. But he kept in the position of power, and he kept wanting to talk to the people in power. And so he didn't just come out and oppose it. He would go to their lecture halls and go into the state houses and talk to them, but he wouldn't, you know, just sort of go around and be an activist for it, because he liked having the ear of people in power. He liked it because power corrupts. You get used to it. He wanted to be kept in the, what is it in a divorce? I need to be kept to the manner I've become accustomed. So he eventually, during the McCarthy era, lost his security clearance because he did. He had communist friends. He had a communist lover who killed herself when he was working on the Manhattan Project. What did she know? I don't know. He had a wife who didn't kill herself, who stayed with him while he was working on the Manhattan Project. There is a movie made about it. It's not a terrible movie, but it's just really, it's not a perfect movie. It could be a lot better. It's called Fat Man and Little Boy, and you can watch it, I think, for a sketch. But then I would go watch something else called The Day After Trinity. And The Day After Trinity is a line from a talk, an interview talk, a quote that Robert Oppenheimer gave. And he was asked after he lost his security clearance. They said, well, you know, what do you say about nuclear power now? He says, well, I'm not in that loop anymore, essentially. I don't have that ability to tell you. He didn't say they've cut me out of it, but that's what he meant. He also, you know, named names. I mean, when he was investigated, he essentially blackballed a number of associates and friends, and many bad things can be said about the man. But he said, and somebody said, well, you know, what about containment of the nuclear program? And he said, it's too late. We should have done that the day after Trinity. So there are 2 movies I want you to watch. 2 movies. One's called Trinity and Beyond, narrated by William Shatner. No, I'm serious. William Shatner narrates it. It's very good. Trinity and Beyond and Day After Trinity. You'll enjoy both of them if you like watching things blow up in terrible nuclear holocausts. This is the Energy Show with Liam Scheff. We figured out that we can run windmills. 1 megawatt windmill can power 400 houses. Probably a lot more if we all cut back and if we make the houses as energy efficient as possible. What wind won't replace is what that Salon.com article talked about in the beginning of the show. It will not replace oil. And oil, by the way, is what makes the world go round. It is the basis of all currency, because currency is truly the one thing. It's only the ability to do work and to build stuff. That's what money is. If you don't have the ability to do work, you can have a 40 gazillion ruble note and it has no value. If you have the ability to do work, well, you know, money talks, bullshit walks. We reviewed the news. We realized that CNN is allowed to say after Chernobyl complexity surrounds local health problems, which is a huge lie. These people were sprayed with the most dangerous radioactive material released on the planet. The lie is also the current going lie that the Chernobyl accident was the worst nuclear power accident that's ever occurred. The correct statement is the worst nuclear power accident that's ever occurred is occurring now, and it's occurring on the coast of Japan. That same GE device is in 16 or so plants in the United States, one of them in Vermont. It's called the Vermont Yankee plant. They're having an ongoing set of problems. I think that thing should be shut down. Even if they do shut them down, what happens? You've got spent fuel pools do you understand what I'm saying? You've got fuel pools full of radioactive material. You understand? Just because you shut it down doesn't make it go away. That's exciting.
Immediately.
David, you can't leave without your clothes.
Huh?
$1,000, you missed that putt.
Yeah, I think we all missed the putt. I think that we've all kind of missed the putt. You can check me out during the week on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Robert and I like to talk energy news. It's less wonky and more chatty, but I appreciate you hanging out. This is what the show is going to be like at times, even though we're going to have commercials, and the music cues will be a little better queued up, and I won't be running everything through a microphone connected to a piece of string that then runs back to the studios. But what they were doing this weekend was very important. They were actually raising money to keep Unbound Radio on the air. And Unbound Radio is very important because I'm on it. Thank you. If you want to make a call, we have a very short 8 minutes left. You can dial 877-456-7631, 877-456-7631, 877-456-7631. Be sure to be caller 10 to win the cubic zirconium sweepstakes, and you'll be entered into an additional sweepstakes to win even more things, probably against your will. I was on Ian Jacqueline's show on Zen TV this week. I very much enjoyed it. It took a couple days more than a couple days to get the archives on the air, but it's a really fun interview, and I'm very happy with it. I learned my lesson. I was on Russia TV a number of years ago, and I was trying to hear what the news prostitute was saying, and I was turning my head downward and toward the speaker, not remembering that the pinhole camera. So it looked like something out of Clockwork Orange, and like bobbing my head in and out of the speaker. It's a great thing. I'm glad it's on the web. I expect that when they roast, when they do the celebrity roast when I'm 60 and the world is looking like Krypton or something like that, that's what they'll play. And I'll have to explain myself. I was trying to hear the news prostitute. So I managed to figure out where the camera was a little bit better. Although it's weird, when you're interviewed, you sometimes get into your own habits and you pause and you consider. And when people are speaking, I often just sort of listen. I'm a very auditory learner, and I won't always engage their eyes. I just really want to hear their words, which really goes to the way that I watch movies. I either watch movies without the sound, just to see the mise en scène. That's a French thing. It means what the hell's happening on screen. Just to see how it unfolds. Or I play it without the visual and I just listen to the audio. And I can't really tell you why. I just like to either I want to see what's happening or I want to hear what's happening. And it's almost like I want them to be separate phenomena so I get as much out of it as possible, because the visual always often overwhelms the audio, and the audio can detract from the visual. A lot of movies have terrible soundtracks. They'll just they'll do filler, or if they're trying to scare you or give you an emotional thing, they'll give you the emotional cue like a minute before the scene is there, and you're like, okay, I'm supposed to feel sad now. Well, give me a fucking give me I said Fukushima. Give me a break. Give me a Fukushima break. Konbanwa. Let's learn just a few Japanese greetings, because we really have to reach out to our Japanese friends and wish them well. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu is good morning. Konbanwa is good evening. Yokoso irashaimashita. I don't really know that one. O genki desu ka? O genki desu ka? How are you? Genki desu. Genki is, I'm doing well. Watashi wa genki desu. Arigato. Let's see. What else do we want to learn? Arigato, of course. Thank you very much. Mr. Rabato. Do itashimashite. Do itashimashite is you're welcome. Samishi kata desu. Samishi kata desu is I missed you so much. Saikin do desu ka is what the hell is happening in Fukushima. Kawari nai desu is Jesus Christ, they're trying to freaking kill us all. And mata ato de aimashou is holy frickin' Christ, you maniacs, you blew it up.
and of course, sayonara, which means it's the end of the show. Let's just give an eye spy to the chat room as we wind down. Let's wind down. Let's put on our winding down pants. In fact, just unbuckle the pants. Let's see what people have been up to on... Here we go. We've got CTHRUITALL. I don't know what that means. Live real close to this. Redgate Woods is a forest preserve within the Palace Division of the Forest Preserve, Illinois, located... I don't really know what that means. There is a signage in the parking lot showing Albert Einstein and Enrico Fermi at the Redgate Woods site during the Manhattan Project. Concrete markers designate historic sites and the foundations of the Manhattan Project still exist. Okay, that's interesting. Happy Shiny says NPR does suck. Happy Shiny says I'd have to agree about Hillary. I don't know what that refers to. Here we go. Anon 1289. Hitler was the son of a Rothschild's daughter. What's the number? I gave the call-in number right there. Nobody called in, though. And Anon 1289, Dr. Samuel Milham on Coast to Coast last night said that windmills are dirty electricity. Well, Dr. Samuel Milham is probably a little bit wrong in the sense that he's also a little bit right. Everything's dirty electricity. Everything... Wait a second. We have a Robin Quivers posting. The Robin Quivers? Iodine for radiation exposure, practical solutions you need to know. Right there at naturalnews.com, our friend Mike Adams, the health ranger, doing God's own work. He just posts and posts and posts, and I don't know how he does it all. I think there are 3 of him. I want to thank you for hanging in with the show, even though we had sort of funny cues, and we had to go in and out a little bit. It's not a sex joke. You can go in and out a little bit without it being a sex joke. You can. You can. Just try it. Reminds me of a friend in high school who had a strange relationship with a Winnie the Pooh, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Somebody's identifying themselves with a little arrow pointing. I'm not going to say who that is. Anon 4236. You keep that to yourself. This week on the Robert Scott Bell Show, we're going to discuss all the news that is and isn't. We are going to begin to talk about permaculture a lot on this show. So if you are a permaculture sexpert or expert, I need you to email me through the Facebook, the FBI social network. I need you to come and help us. We all have to help ourselves figure out how we're supposed to grow food when we don't have the green revolution and the anhydrous ammonium from the natural gas to do it. You understand what I'm saying? We have to become a little bit self-sufficient. And if you're like me, you're kind of a little bit lazy. Look, I like gardening for some of the day, but God, aren't you just a little bit afraid you're going to have to go out and with the plow and the hoe and the horse and the donkey and the mule and the cow, the oxen, and dig up... Well, you don't want to dig up the land anyway because you'll lose all the topsoil. You don't want to do that. We got to figure out how to grow things. We have to figure out how to grow things in a slightly toxic environment. We have to figure out how to store and can things. That's part of energy these days. It absolutely is.
And we're back to the future. Hopefully that wasn't too all over the place. That was a bit of a rhapsody about Fukushima, nuclear power, Robert Oppenheimer, the creation of the nuclear bomb. You've been listening to the Liam Scheff Show. We talked about what science journalists get wrong, what journalists get wrong when they talk about science. I suppose you could start a fund to try to help science journalists near you, but I doubt it will ever come to much. You could ask them to be fair, to look at both the pro and con systematically, with an eye toward looking at the negative effects of the drugs and the chemicals that they believe are so helpful, or the critics of any going concern, to see if it really makes sense. I doubt any will really take the bait. They're struggling to become famous, which means they have to fillet the same academic wangs as all the people in the academics who want to get their PhD thesis approved. So everybody's busy doing some intellectual fellatio, and nobody's busy doing critical thinking. Not in the mainstream. You got to step outside of the mainstream, and even in the alternative, you end up with a lot of too much Nibiru, too much flat earth, too much HAARP, and not enough hard critical thinking about what we can actually demonstrate. Support independent journalism and hard critical thinking by buying Official Stories on Amazon.com. Thank you very much for being a fan, a friend of the show, and a fan of the show, and a regular listener. Spread the broadcast, like the YouTube page, say hi on Facebook. See you next week.